Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again on our podcast, Moms in the Move. I'm Jen Wills.
And I'm Ashley Steigerwald.
And we have a special guest today, Dr. Lauren Batson.
Hello.
She is a clinical psychologist and a pediatric neuropsychologist, which is a very impressive resume. More impressive than our resumes.
Absolutely.
But we were very excited to have you because I think this is a topic that moms need right now. And a lot of moms are struggling with the mental health of our kids, virtual learning. So we wanted to have you on as like a resource for moms and how, you know, they can implement strategies and what you're seeing. So if you want to give us a little background.
Yeah, sure. So my practice, we focus on assessment. So psychological assessment, typically the kids that we see have some sort of learning-based issue. So parents are often concerned about a potential learning disability such as dyslexia or maybe a potential attention disorder or even autism spectrum. So our assessments are primarily regarding issues related to learning, but they're very comprehensive. And so we're looking at the whole child. And part of those assessments also looks at things like emotional, behavioral, social functioning. And so, yes, we're seeing lots of issues related to COVID and the virtual learning that has come about as a result of the pandemic. And I would say that families who were struggling before the pandemic are really struggling, right? I mean, and there's some families that have navigated this amazingly well, and I think that those are families that, you know, didn't have underlying mental health issues, or, you know, maybe families that have the flexibility of a parent to be at home to, and maybe even a stay-at-home mom who was previously a teacher. Like those people are going to be more successful in this kind of setup than, you know, your typical family who has two parents who are working, or maybe it's a stay-at-home parent but who has no educational experience, and they're suddenly thrust into the role of being teacher, which, you know, is a lot of pressure. And depending on the ages of the children, you know, especially if you've got a young child who's learning something basic, like, but very important, like how to read, you know? So I'm seeing a lot of moms, a lot of parents who are really stressed out.
We, prior to the podcast started, we were talking and mentioned, you know, so I have a 6-year-old, 4-year-old, and my baby just turned 1. We had obviously struggled in the spring, but towards the end of the spring, he just didn't want to listen to me anymore. He was over
the 6-year-old.
Yeah, the 6-year-old. He was over it. Did not want to listen. And honestly, it was so hard because I had the baby, so I didn't really have enough time or energy, honestly, to focus on him the way I needed to. So we decided to put the boys, Bennett and Braden, the olders, into the private school, which we're fortunate enough to be able to do that.
Have the resources and be able to do that.
Yeah. But I'm not the only one out there with multiple kids and a baby. So I think about those moms often, how they're possibly juggling all of this.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And I'd say there has been a huge influx. All of the private schools in town that I know of, you know, are seeing huge rise in enrollment. We do entry testing for a couple of different private schools in town, and just the number of applicants and families insisting on doing the entry testing, even though there were no spaces available, just in case something opened up, because they were really desperate to have their kiddo in more of a regular classroom setting. But you're right, that's not a possibility for everybody.
I know.
So there's a lot of people having to make do. You know, I think that, you know, in some neighborhoods, there's been these little micro schools that have popped up.
I've seen those,
and moms helping moms and kind of doing some instruction that way. But yes, I think it's very hard to be parent and teacher. And I think it's important as moms to preserve our role as mom. And, you know, it's a lot of stress when you're trying to teach your child basic academic skills or complex algebra, either one. There's a lot of stress involved, and so there can be a whole lot of conflict. And, you know, kids are going to act out more when they're with the people that they're most comfortable with.
Absolutely.
And that's going to be the parents. That's oftentimes the mom. And so they're, you know, maybe a very compliant child in the classroom with the teacher that they're eager to please, and they want to meet those classroom
That's my kid to a T.
behavioral expectations. But with mom, they can push those limits, and that's really a compliment to you as a mom. that they feel safe with you.
Yeah, we've talked about that. Like my children are wonderful at school, and then they come home and it's like, nuts.
Yeah,
because they feel free enough to. Yep. It's that emotional regulation all day at school.
Absolutely.
And then they need that release when they get home. Yeah. Whether it's physical, and if they can't physically, if there's not a physical activity, they've got to get it out somehow.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of kids who, especially kids that we see, who may have something like an attention disorder, and they have a hard time with self-regulation. But in the classroom, they do well with that additional structure of the classroom setting. And like I said, there's also that desire to meet those expectations in the classroom and please the teacher, and they don't want to be called out in front of their peers. And so they may be working extremely hard to, kind of keep it between the buoys in the classroom, and then they get home and they let it all hang out.
Right. Now, what about the kids that, ADHD and ADD are so common? What about those kids that are home?
Yeah.
What are your suggestions for?
Yeah. Well, I think as much as possible, and, it's easier said than done oftentimes, but structure. All kids love predictability, and that's one thing that's really been missing during this pandemic, I think, for everybody. There's a lot less predictability because, we don't know when they're going back to school. If once they're back, it's going to, depending on the rates of COVID. Will they have soccer this spring? Will we be able to see grandma and grandpa at Christmas? So there's a lot of uncertainties, and that creates a lot of disruption, a lot of anxiety for all of us, but especially for kids. So all kids benefit from structure, but especially kids that have attention disorders, particularly that combined presentation of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. They have a hard time with regulating attention, with regulating behavior, regulating emotions. And those kids in particular need a whole lot of structure. So as much as possible, having that usual routine. Maybe it's a visual schedule that shows kind of what the day is going to look like.
Yep.
And that helps provide them some independence too, some predictability of what the day is going to look like, and also some independence like, what comes next? I can reference the list instead of mom having to, hound them and give those repeated directions and reminders. And so kids just generally benefit from structure, especially kids that have attention disorders, and also kids that have anxiety love that predictability. They love to know what's coming next.
Right.
That helps to soothe some of that anxiety, just to know what's coming.
What are you seeing in, how old are your boys? Are 15?
15, 10, and 8.
10, 10, and 8. Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a different, and I think one of the questions I had for you is how to manage some of the disappointment that comes with the loss of their activities, the loss of social time with their friends. That was definitely one of the things I saw in the spring, that they were used to being with their friends every day, and especially the older one, the disappointment of not having a football season or not having a soccer season, or all of these growing up milestones that are. And it's been I've struggled with that, on how to help them be resilient and overcome some of these disappointments.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think about kids who were graduating high school, or some of these benchmark, or missing prom, missing a traditional high school graduation ceremony, and I've seen a lot of schools get very creative about how to do those things, and there still be some sort of marker to kind of celebrate the event. But it has been very challenging. And I think all of us need that social interaction, but especially when you're thinking about a teenager. That's their world, right? I mean, because they've started to differentiate from us as parents, and the peer group becomes even more important. And then when they're suddenly cut off from their peers, that's really stressful and can, I think, and has exacerbated higher rates of anxiety and depression. And research that they're doing mostly with questionnaires that are sent out to parents and teens, they're seeing lots more anxiety and depression. And I think, one, as far as, I sort of have a love-hate relationship with social media, but in some ways it's been beneficial because it allows kids to stay connected on some level,
Yeah, we've been no social media for the kids at all. And so that was one of the things we relented on. He's 15. We set up a private Instagram account.
Yeah.
I'm very careful about what I see on here because his friends watch these as well.
Yeah.
But that was one of the things that we did let up on. And the push-pull on that was we need to see who you're following and vice versa who's following you.
Yeah, so and be wise about it.
Yeah, we put some restrictions on it, but we felt with him with the isolation aspect that we thought that might help a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think we've had to all kind of think outside the box and, kind of reconsider. We have to be flexible and adaptable, and maybe this was a hard and fast rule in your household, but given the times, maybe there are some advantages if we do it in a smart way, so it certainly is it's not as good as the real thing, having real interpersonal interaction, but, sometimes those virtual connections can, at least provide some interaction. And thankfully we live in a community in which we have lots of great outdoor spaces and, there's opportunities to be outdoors and interact that way in a safer way, But I think with the weather getting colder, that's going to be harder for families.
We've already struggled with that. This past week, it was so cold, and we were just like kind of in the house the whole time, and I was going mildly crazy.
Yeah,
my baby was going crazy.
I'm like, bundle up, we're going outside. I don't care. Figure it out. Extra socks.
Absolutely. And I think our children's mental health is dependent in part on our mental health, and I think as moms, and I'm imagine that this has been a topic y'all have talked about before outside of the current circumstances, but just how you have to take care of yourself as a mom, and self-care really is important, especially in a time like this.
We just talked about that, how you're not able to help your kids if you're losing it. Yeah. So don't be, above asking for help.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Asking for help, taking the time that you need to recharge, being aware of what your own needs are, before you get to the end of your fuse, and then have that, explosion that you regret later.
Yeah, exactly. Did this week.
Yes. And we're all human. That's right. All human.
But I think that's important for our kids to see when we do have those snap moments to admit that, hey, I lost my cool. That was not the way I should have handled it. I apologize. I should have handled it this way. How did that make you feel? I think that's one thing that I've tried to model with my kids is when I mess up too. Yes. Because we're very quick to hold them accountable. Yeah. But are we equally invested in holding ourselves accountable and modeling that for our kids? Yeah. And that's hard sometimes. That's really hard.
Just like a real mom moment. This week, it was, again, cold. It was Bo, our baby, just started school, so he's been a little off this week and really clingy to me. So I was trying to make the boys dinner, and I was making them French toast, and for some reason, I don't know what I did wrong. I just kept not being able to make the most basic meal. And I went through 10 pieces of bread. I don't know how that's even remotely possible. And then I just chucked the pan into the sink. And Brayden went flying upstairs. And I was like, I was so upset. Yeah. And then I said, sorry, I'm going to try to make French toast tomorrow night.
We'll try again tomorrow.
Cereal
we'll order pizza tonight.
Pizza or cereal.
Exactly.
And he said, all right, will you just not throw the pan next time?
No, it's so true. But I think there's a lot to be learned, like you said, by admitting our own, shortcomings, our own limitations. That nobody's perfect, and it's important to own your own mistakes and model it as an opportunity for growth and learning. For our kids too.
Especially now. I mean, we're all at our wits' end. I mean, every mom and our kids are in private school.
And same. I mean. And before I jump into the topic about socioeconomics and how I feel that this pandemic, but one of my kids, my husband says he's just like me, but we really butt heads sometimes. Yes. And I had this tendency to be like, okay, I just need you to go to your room. And I realized that by me isolating him, I was encouraging his feelings that he was bad or wasn't loved, or it was. So I've had to figure out other ways to deal with that outside of isolating him, because that wasn't. And every kid's different. What worked with the first kid didn't work with the second kid, doesn't work with the third kid, and it's trying to figure out those strategies of what works. And just when you figure out what works, they're in
the different developmental stage. Exactly. And you have to get creative and adapt and adjust. It is constantly changing. That's for sure.
I do notice that like Bennett's behavior is so much better when he is in school.
And the structure.
It's the structure for him. He's definitely the one that needs that structure.
Yes.
And my middle one, he doesn't need it as much. He's just kind of his own little guy. But Bennett definitely needs that structure, and we call it, Brayden's a 3-day friend, then it's the 5-day friend. And he recently was like, can I be a 7-day friend? I was like,
like
no.
go to school 7
days?
Oh, wow.
He wants to go to school 7 days.
Yeah.
And I'm
he
like,
really loves structure.
Yes. He really loves it.
And seeing his friends.
He loves to see his friends, and he loves that structure, and he really thrives at school. So it just breaks my heart for the ones that
haven't been able to.
Yeah, I mean,
and that's my big concern. Is I remember in the summer when we were gearing up for fall, and it was still unknown about what school was going to look like this year, and I kept hearing people say or memes online, well, everybody's in the same boat, and everybody is going to be behind when this is all over. And I was like, no, they're not.
No, it's really not.
It's really not.
This is highlighting, making those discrepancies in our
Absolutely.
Community even greater.
I agree. Because same, like we were able to be agile and make the investment in private school this year, which we probably wouldn't have done, and which was absolutely the right decision for our family. Trying to spring trying to teach a 14-year-old algebra, it was bad.
So y'all both made the change to private school starting this school year because
our
of the
boys
pandemic.
were always at Southside.
Okay.
And then we were going to do kindergarten at Oakview this year.
Okay.
And I decided,
and then you changed
no
that
way.
plan.
And we were public school, and all three are doing private this year, mainly because I work full time. My husband works full time.
And were you able to get them at the same private school?
They're all at the same. It's
I mean, I know
K-12.
some families who have the resources to do private school, but ended up not being able to get them in the same school. So they've got multiple, schedules.
But the families that can't afford to do that, the families that are working, and the kids are at home, or they're doing, e-learning at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night. I worry about the mental health of those parents as well. Trying to work full time and then come home and do e-learning. I worry about the kids that have been lost this year that haven't logged in at all.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that is just
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of academic skills that have been lost. A lot of supervision that's not available for kids who need it, and that not only are they not going to get their schoolwork done potentially, but going to get into some dangerous situations, or go down a path that's going to be hard to correct later. So it is a big problem, not just for this community obviously, but for all of them.
And again, this isn't even Greenville specific. This is across
but I mean, I think
right
one
now.
step in finding a solution is being aware of, like you said, we're not all in the same boat actually. That there are big discrepancies in the resources that different families have, and that the families who don't have as much are going to suffer the greatest consequences.
Yeah. And I think too, it's important. Just I've jokingly said this after the baby was born, when they're like, "How are you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, we're surviving. We're not thriving." But I think that you can say that and have that expectation, like the expectations moms put on themselves sometimes are very unrealistic, and they might be comparing themselves to the mom down the street who has a 5-year-old only and was a previous teacher
with an elaborate Pinterest page.
Exactly. So you don't have to
decorations
just
for the holidays.
Survive this turmoil, but don't expect to thrive.
Yeah,
so
exactly. Set your expectations to do the best you can. And I think that goes back to when we make mistakes or have shortcomings, owning it, but also I think not expecting perfection of ourselves or for others.
I can't make French toast.
That reminds me, once when my kids had a group of neighborhood friends over, and I was going to make grilled cheese for everybody. And so buttered up the bread, got it all toasty looking. Anyway, put it on the plate, and only like 2 of the 10 sandwiches actually had cheese in them. So I served up, buttered bread for lunch. So we do our best.
Don't tell your parents, guys.
That's right. Exactly.
But back to like the perfection aspect, that's something that I've struggled with, and realized that I always thought it was a what are one of your strengths? I'm a perfectionist. I was like, absolutely not. That is terrible. And I have to often tell myself, and this is something that I work with one of my kids on, because I see this manifesting in him as well. Progress over perfection. And I have to tell myself that all the time. Because otherwise I'll get stuck in this perfectionist cycle that turns into procrastination.
Yes, absolutely.
And I see that in my kids, and it's the intermittent incremental, there we go, incremental progress over perfection sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I sometimes refer to myself as a recovering perfectionist because I think I was definitely that kid who, did well in school and was driven and thought I had to get everything just right. And as you mature, you see that that's not realistic and that actually takes a toll on your mental health. And I think sometimes parents, some of their frustration in working with their kids is because they want them to get it just right, or they hold themselves to a high standard, and sometimes those parents aren't even aware of what a high standard that they hold their child to, and that can create a lot of unnecessary stress and anxiety.
Or they internalize their child's success in school as a reflection of their parenting. I know I've been guilty of that, and it's something that I've been trying to be aware of myself, that if, I may have these certain expectations or standards, but as long as they are literally, if they go in there and we're a sports family, if you leave it all out on the field, that is all that you can ask of them.
Yeah, exactly. Give it your best.
Yeah. But I think I hear a lot of parents struggling with the procrastination aspect of kids in e-learning. Do you have any tactical tools for parents on that as well? Because I hear it from parents when they go, especially their middle school, high school age kids. Did you get your e-learning done? Yes. And then 7:00 at night, the emails start coming in, missing assignment.
Exactly. Exactly. Right. I think, for a lot of folks, it helps to visually kind of see that big calendar, hanging on the wall. I mean, technology can be helpful, and you've got all these, devices that have calendars, and you can use those reminders, and that's helpful. But I think for a lot of people, just that old-fashioned paper calendar, something up on the wall where you can see the week in a glance. And I think a lot of kids struggle with what we call executive functioning, so that ability to independently initiate a task and to plan and organize the sequence of steps needed to complete the task and manage time. And especially if it's a big project, a lot of kids really benefit from that. Can be overwhelming. And so helping them break that big project down into little incremental steps. So if it's a book report that's due in 3 weeks, then picking the book by a certain date, putting that on the calendar, having read the first few chapters by the next day, so helping them break it into digestible pieces. And then I think it seems a lot less overwhelming, and then you're more apt to get started, when it seems like something that's not insurmountable.
I'm like the old fashioned. I put everything in my calendar and then I cross stuff
isn't that just very satisfying?
So
being able to check a box.
Sometimes I'm guilty of putting something I just did on there, and I'm like,
cross it off.
I'll get home from a workout and I'm like, workout crossed.
Did it.
Done.
Check. Yeah, exactly. I had a roommate who used to put her weekend list would have reading whatever novel she was reading for pleasure. It's okay, that's going a little far. And you're putting that on your to-do list.
But maybe that is beneficial definitely for kids because, it is satisfying. It makes you feel like you're at least accomplishing versus it being this overwhelming.
Yeah, so I think procrastination most often is for a kid. I mean, we struggle with procrastination for different reasons. Sometimes it's perfectionistic. You make it into a bigger deal than it really has to be. And so, if you can the goal is completion, not perfection, can help you to get started. And then another reason a lot of people procrastinate is because of those executive deficits, and especially with kids that have attention disorders. It's really hard to, like I said, initiate, plan, and organize the individual steps. And so breaking it down for them and helping model some of those
What
skills.
is your advice? You were saying the mental health that you've noticed so much has really increased in anxiety and depression. For those families, what is your biggest, natural, where they don't have to come in and get, is it
obviously, psychotherapy is available, but we know that there are also limited resources for that, unfortunately, and not a lot of, and that too, socioeconomic. There are some agencies that provide free or reduced cost services, but a lot of mental health is fee for service, which can be a barrier. I mean, thankfully, with the pandemic, a lot of therapists have been able to do teletherapy. I mean, for very young kids, I think that's hard, but I think for older kids, it can be really effective, and they can do it from home in a safe way and connect, virtually with a therapist and talk that way. There's a lot of also self-help books that are available and things that depending on the age of the child that they may do independently or can be done along with a parent that can help guide them. And then also, we know that that physical activity is helpful for our mental health. You know, especially things like yoga that have a meditative component can be really helpful for anxiety. You know, learning to, you know, kind of focus in the here and now and put out, you know, actively learn to shut down those worries about what's to come or concerns about
that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that that physical activity is helpful, being outside is helpful. You know, and I think as much as possible in these uncertain times, trying to give kids that sense of control and predictability and consistency.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I'm worried for, you know, right now it's like Christmas is coming up and there's just fun stuff going on, but come January.
Yeah, January is always me for
everybody. It's kind of like you have to go in mentally knowing like, all right, next 60 days, let's do this.
Yes.
How do you? What are some things that parents should be looking for to say, okay, this is maybe a little bit more than the COVID blues?
Yeah,
and maybe
that's a good question.
Maybe I should look into getting my child in to speak with someone.
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, typically when we're thinking about something like depression, we'll see some changes in appetite or sleep patterns. Maybe the child is, I mean, we know that they're not able to get out and about with their friends, but are they not just, you know, so we're all at home more, but are they actually retreating to their room, you know, closing the door, not interacting with the family, you know, seeming less bright and cheerful, less interest in activities that they used to find enjoyable. So those are the sorts of things that, you know, are would be more concerning. Like if they're not taking, if there is an opportunity to interact with their friends and they're choosing not to, or if there is an activity that they used to enjoy that they're able to do and they're no longer wanting to do. So yeah, I would look for some of those physiological changes and things like appetite, sleep patterns, but also just that less interested in things they used to enjoy. Yeah, as evidence of depression. I think with anxiety, sometimes kids, depending on the age of the child, very young kids can, you know, we think of the kid who's anxious as being the one that's, you know, biting their nails or, you know, appears outwardly anxious. But a lot of anxiety is internalized, and as parents, it can be hard to identify. And especially with young kids, anxiety can present more like a temper tantrum, a lot of aggression, and many times underneath that anger and those outbursts is anxiety. And so sometimes parents can see some of those outward behaviors and think you're just being a nasty kiddo. You're just being difficult. Yeah. But really what's underneath that is a lot of anxiety and discomfort. And so I think when you see, you know, significant changes in behavior, then those are some things to be, you know, investigated. Yeah.
My poor kids, they're getting all the bad mental health stuff from me. I feel so bad for them.
I think the same. It's like, oh, there's my temper. And
no lifeguard on duty at the gene pool is what I like to say.
You're genetically doomed, my children. I'm sorry.
So sorry, guys. Yeah. I know. I actually jokingly say that a lot. I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
But, you know, and that's where it's good to be aware of our own strengths and weaknesses and our own limitations, and you know, can model some of the things that, you know, if you see some of the similar struggles in your child, being able to have that insight and awareness and talk to them about, you know, I can remember when I was your age and I struggled with this, and as an adult I found this to be helpful, or that, you know, kind of talk them through some of those things.
Yeah.
Now also, like, you know, we're talking about the kids, but also teachers are struggling too.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of teacher friends. They were thrown into this. As much as it was said that they prepared, they were not prepared.
Yeah.
I think they prepared as well
as they could.
I think, everybody does the best they can with what they know and what they have at the time. And I think the teachers are doing the absolute best they can.
They absolutely are.
The burnout, I see some of the posts online, and they're doing e-learning and they're doing in-person learning, and they're trying to, on their off time, they're planning, plus they have their own families and their own kids and their e-learning.
Yeah.
Our teachers right now are...
and I can imagine that they are getting blasted with a lot of emails from unhappy parents. You know.
They are, and I think that people need to realize what is on the teacher's plate. It's like it's too much.
Yeah, these are trying times for everyone.
For everybody. I know. If you could offer advice to, like, even just like Greenville County, like from your professional, perspective, what you're seeing, what would you advise?
Like in terms of
like e-learning expectations or?
Well, it's interesting because we, like I was saying before, we do assessments, and one of the big questions is, does my child have a learning disability? And that's becoming harder. That will become harder to say definitively. Is this truly a learning disability, or is this because of inadequate instruction that the child has a lag in their learning?
Right.
Because part of how we define a learning disability is when a person's learning in a given academic area doesn't meet up to expectation based on what you would expect, depending on a person's learning aptitude. So, but that lag may not be because of, it may be that they're not, if they're struggling to read, for example, it could be because of an underlying learning disability like dyslexia, or it could be because they've missed a whole lot of instruction.
Right.
And so I think, being aware of that they're not getting as much as they need right now, and that, some of our kids are missing out, like we talked about, on a lot more instruction than others. Supplementing that as much as you can at home, we talked about, but also just, I think the reality is that they're not always, the standardized scores aren't going to look as good, and being setting those expectations that there's some gaps and some holes that are going to have to be filled for a long time.
Yeah,
because they're not having that everyday in-person, face-to-face with teachers, with guidance counselors who would normally recognize some attention deficit or dyslexia or dysgraphia or some of these other. So I think and this is just a total guess, you can tell me if I'm wrong on this, but there'll be a lag in some diagnosis or, immediate intervention that would have happened earlier for some of these kids.
So I'd say like last spring, parents weren't having those same end of the year teacher conferences. And so there weren't as many referrals for assessments from the professionals at the school. But on the other hand, parents were seeing things firsthand sometimes. Gotcha. And, oh, wow, I didn't realize that my kid had such a hard time focusing. Is that just because of the chaos in the home and the lack of structure around e-learning, or is this, part of a bigger picture? Right. So, we saw fewer referrals driven by the schools because kids were not in school to have those end of the year meetings, but then a lot of parents like seeing things firsthand and were alarmed and calling. Can we get in tomorrow?
Oh my gosh.
Well, honestly, like from our experience, I would have been calling about Bennett. Like I can't even get him to do his homework for me.
Right.
But then he goes to school and he's this little perfect angel child.
Structure.
Structure.
And
so
it's important to know.
Maybe parents don't need to.
Don't press the panic button.
Right.
I mean, that there are times where full assessment is warranted, and there's other times where, okay, let's kind of look at the environment, and is this something that's just situational?
Yeah. Right. Do you have any other questions?
You had mentioned low cost or no cost mental health care. Is that something that's available through Medicaid or through private organizations, or where do they go?
Yeah, so we know that Greenville County Mental Health is one resource, but there are a couple of other agencies, and I can send you their information.
Yeah, we can link it up.
Yes.
Yeah, that you could put up on the links for parents.
That would be great.
Yeah.
And your company
is Greenville Assessment and Learning Specialist.
Okay. Wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Lauren, for coming.
Thank you
nice
so much
to meet y'all.
I hope this was
has
helpful.
Been fun. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah,
Thank
I think
you
this
for
will help
having me.
some moms. Anyway, thank you everybody for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
See ya.
Bye.